The rain was cold, but the billionaire's voice was colder, cutting through Maya's grief like a serrated blade. As she sat in that dimly lit room, still wearing the dress from her husband's funeral, Julian Vane leaned in close, his shadow swallowing her whole. He didn't offer sympathy, he offered a transaction so twisted it defied every law of humanity. "Spread your legs," he whispered, his eyes filled with a terrifying ancestral hunger. "I will only stop when my heir is in your womb." In that moment, Maya realized her husband's death wasn't an accident. It was a clearance. Now she was trapped in a golden cage where her skin color made her a target and his wealth made him a god. How far would a man go to own a legacy? And what happens when the woman he tries to break decides to burn his empire down? This is a story of power, race, and a survival you won't believe. Before we dive into this powerful story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications, so you never miss a story that needs to be told.
Maya could still smell the faint traces of her husband's cologne in the air, a reminder of the life that had once been. She clutched the cold, thin fabric of her black dress, its edges frayed from the hours of crying, the weight of grief heavy in her chest. The funeral had ended only hours ago, but it felt like a lifetime. Everyone had left except for her. The empty house felt like a tomb, every corner filled with memories of a man she had loved, a man she had thought she would grow old with. She could still hear his voice echoing in her mind, feel his presence around every corner. But now all that remained was emptiness, the echoes of a life that once was. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected the cold reality of what the future now held. As she stood alone, the wind tugging at the hem of her dress, she realized that she was truly alone now. No one would ever fill this space. The invitation had come in the form of an envelope, just one line scrawled in cold, formal handwriting. "Meet me at my estate. We have unfinished business." Maya hadn't known how to respond. She had never heard of Julian Vane before, but she knew the name now as it echoed in her mind, filling every empty space in her heart with dread. The words felt like an order, not a request. She stared at the black envelope in her trembling hands, wondering how she had ended up in this mess. Her fingers gripped the paper, and a wave of dread washed over her. She'd never imagined it would be like this, standing on the precipice of an unknown future, with nothing but a piece of paper to guide her. The heavy silence in her apartment felt suffocating. As the letter burned into her hands, she knew this meeting would change everything. His mansion was on the outskirts of town, towering and imposing like something out of a nightmare. She had driven there in a haze, her hands gripping the wheel, unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Every inch of the road felt like it was pulling her deeper into a trap, her mind spinning with questions she couldn't answer. The gates were massive, their ironwork intricate and foreboding, like the gates of a prison. As Maya stopped in front of them, her heart began to race. She knew she couldn't turn back. Her feet were already on the path laid out for her, and she would have to face whatever came next. As she stepped out of the car, the mansion loomed in front of her, imposing, silent, and ready to consume her. It was like stepping into a different world, one that seemed to press down on her with every passing second. The doors opened without a word, ushering her into the opulent but soulless interior. The faint sound of classical music played from somewhere deep in the house, but it did nothing to calm her nerves. Nothing could. Julian's eyes were cold as he stared at her from across the room. His dark suit, impeccable as always, seemed to absorb the light around him, making him look like a shadow himself. But it wasn't his appearance that unsettled her. It was the power he wielded, the coldness in his voice that made her stomach churn. "Please sit," he said smoothly, his voice like velvet yet laced with venom. Maya barely moved as he motioned to the chair in front of him. She was trapped, her mind spinning as she struggled to make sense of the situation. She wanted to leave, to run, but the thought of being alone again in that empty house, with nothing but the haunting memory of her husband's death, kept her rooted to the spot. Julian walked slowly around the room, his footsteps deliberate, as if savoring each moment of her discomfort. "I'm sure you're wondering why you're here," he said, his eyes never leaving her face. Your husband owed me a debt, Maya, a debt that has now passed to you. The words hung in the air, their meaning sinking into her chest like a heavy weight. Her heart skipped a beat, but she remained silent. She hadn't heard anything about any debt. Her husband had been a simple man, hardworking, honest, a man who would never owe anyone like this. I understand your confusion, Julian continued, his voice smooth, his demeanor unwavering. But this is bigger than you, bigger than anyone. The legacy your husband left is now mine, and in return for his unfortunate death, I'll be taking what I'm owed. Maya's throat went dry. Her mind raced, but no words came out. She felt a deep, bone-chilling unease that she couldn't shake. This wasn't just about money. It was something darker, something twisted that she couldn't yet understand. The weight of his words pressed down on her like a vice. She didn't know what to do next, but she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer in control. Julian's words had dug deep, and as she turned her eyes away from him, the suffocating silence of the mansion seemed to fill the space around her. Her footsteps echoed through the cavernous halls, the mansion now feeling like a prison. She was isolated here, with nowhere to turn and no one to trust. She had to find a way out. But how? How could she possibly escape a man like Julian Vane? Julian stopped pacing and turned to face her fully. You see, Maya, I don't just want what's mine. I want you. I want you to carry my legacy forward. You have something I need, something I can't get any other way. And you'll give it to me. Her breath caught in her throat as he leaned closer, his words sharp as a blade. Spread your legs, Maya. I will only stop when my heir is in your womb. The room seemed to close in on her as his words echoed in her ears, paralyzing her. This wasn't just a business deal. It was a twisted, grotesque demand. She could feel the rage bubbling inside her, mixing with the fear, and for a brief, fleeting moment, she considered fighting back. But how? What could she do against someone with so much power? Her mind scrambled for an escape, but all she could do was stare at him, trapped in his web of cruelty. Maya's chest tightened as the implications of his words settled into her bones. She wasn't just a widow. She wasn't just a woman grieving the loss of her husband. To him, she was an object, a tool to be used for his own twisted purposes, and her skin color, her very existence, was a part of the equation. She was expendable, replaceable, nothing more than a pawn in his game of wealth and power. In that moment, Maya realized something she hadn't wanted to face. Her husband's death wasn't an accident. It was no tragedy. It was a clearance. Julian had orchestrated it, planned it, to make room for his new acquisition, her. Maya's mind raced as Julian's words echoed in her ears, his offer hanging in the air like a dark cloud, suffocating her. She wanted to scream, to run, to fight back, but her body refused to move. She was paralyzed, stuck in that moment of dread, every instinct telling her to escape but knowing it was impossible. The weight of what he had said, the threat hidden in his words, pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. He was waiting for a response, his eyes never leaving hers. The silence between them felt suffocating, stretching on longer than it should have. The power he exuded, the control he had over her in that moment, it was overwhelming. The room felt smaller, as if it was closing in on her, pressing down with every breath she took. But through the fog of fear, Maya could feel something else building inside her, an ember of defiance. She had been afraid for so long, afraid of what Julian could do, afraid of losing everything. But this was different. This was no longer about her survival. It was about more than that. It was about her dignity, her strength, her ability to stand up for herself when the world had tried to tear her down. "I'm not your property," Maya finally managed to whisper, her voice shaky but defiant. Julian's smirk faltered for just a moment, and that small shift in his expression fueled her resolve. She wasn't going to let him have her, not without a fight. He had taken so much already, her husband, her life, her peace, but he wouldn't take her spirit. The thought of it gave her a burst of courage. Julian took a step closer, his eyes cold, calculating, assessing her. "You think you have a choice?" he asked, his voice low, a dangerous edge to it. "You think you can walk away from this?" The moment you stepped into this house, Maya, you became part of my world. Whether you like it or not, you'll comply. There's no other way." His words struck her like a slap, but she didn't flinch. Instead, her posture stiffened. "I will never do what you're asking," Maya said, her voice growing stronger, each word like a declaration. "I'm not some tool you can manipulate. I'm a person, and I will never let you break me." Her voice, once shaky, was now full of fire. Julian's face twisted into a smile that was anything but kind. "You're wrong," he said, his voice cold as ice. "You don't have a choice. You see, Maya, I'm a man who always gets what he wants. You can resist, you can fight, but in the end I will own you. And the more you resist, the more it will cost you." His words didn't break her, they only strengthened her. Maya knew he had power, wealth, influence, and control. But what he didn't have was the one thing that mattered, her will. She wasn't going to let him crush her. Not now. Not ever. The tension between them was palpable, the air charged with unspoken animosity. Julian stepped back, his eyes never leaving hers. "We'll see how long you can hold on to that pride of yours," he said, his voice cold as ice. "But make no mistake, Maya, I will break you. This is just the beginning." His words hit her like a slap, and she felt a surge of fear grip her chest. He was right about one thing: he wasn't someone to be underestimated. His wealth, his influence, it all made him untouchable. But there was something else. There was a fire inside her, something deep within her that refused to let him win. As Julian turned away, his footsteps echoing in the large room, Maya's mind raced. She needed a plan. She needed to figure out how to survive this, how to protect herself from a man who saw her only as a means to an end. But as she stood there, her mind swirling with thoughts of escape, she realized something crucial. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. Her husband had never been the kind of man who would leave her defenseless. He had left her something important. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give her a fighting chance. The memory of the envelope he had left for her, hidden in a drawer she hadn't thought to open until now, flickered in her mind. Maya turned and hurried to the desk in the corner, pushing aside the clutter of papers and files. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she had to find something. Her fingers moved quickly, sifting through the papers, the weight of the situation pressing down on her shoulders. The silence in the room was almost unbearable, as if it was waiting for something to break. And then there it was, the envelope. It was yellowed with age, its edges frayed. She had almost forgotten about it. The sense of urgency in her heart grew as she ripped it open, her hands trembling as she unfolded the letter inside. It was a letter from her husband, written just before his death. His handwriting was familiar, comforting, but what he had written shocked her. "Maya, if you're reading this, I've already failed you. But you must know there are people who will try to use you, who will try to control you after I'm gone. Julian Vane is one of them. He will come for you. I've set things in motion, but you need to be strong. I don't have much time, but there's something you must know. Someone will help you. Trust no one except for the one who will come for you when the time is right. They are the key." Maya's heart skipped a beat. It was clear now. Her husband had known what was coming. He had known that Julian would come after her, that he would stop at nothing to manipulate her. But he had also set something in motion. Someone was out there, someone who could help her. The question was, who and when? As she stared at the letter, a sense of clarity washed over her. She wasn't alone. Her husband hadn't abandoned her. He had left her a path, a way out. It wasn't going to be easy and it wasn't going to be quick, but she could fight back. She could survive this. But now, the question was no longer about surviving. It was about fighting back. And the battle she was about to face was far greater than she could have ever imagined. The sound of footsteps approaching pulled her from her thoughts, and Maya quickly stuffed the letter back into the envelope, her mind racing. She wasn't ready, but she had no choice. She had to act. And that's when it happened. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. The man who entered was tall and broad-shouldered, his dark coat blending with the shadows of the room. Maya froze for a moment, unsure whether to trust him, unsure whether he was another of Julian's spies or a potential ally. But there was something in his eyes, something that made her hesitate just long enough to see past the coldness. He spoke first, his voice steady but quiet. "You're Maya, aren't you?" The words hung in the air, and Maya's heart skipped a beat. How did he know her name? "I know who you are," he continued, "and I know what you're trying to do. You're not alone in this fight." Maya's pulse raced. Who was this man? Was he sent by Julian, or was he truly an ally? The uncertainty gnawed at her, but there was a calmness in his demeanor that made her pause. He wasn't threatening her, not yet. "I'm here to help," he said, his voice low, urgent. "Your husband was part of something bigger than you realize. We've been watching Julian for a long time, and now it's time to make our move." Maya's heart pounded in her chest as the realization hit her. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone had been watching. Someone had been waiting for this moment, just like her. She had never imagined there were others out there who knew about Julian, who understood the dark empire he had built. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt a spark of hope. This was no longer about being alone in the fight. She was no longer powerless. "What do I need to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man's eyes met hers with quiet determination. "We need to gather information. We need to expose Julian for what he really is, but we can't do it alone. There are others, people who have been hurt by him. You'll need to trust them, and you'll need to trust me. The time to act is now." Maya nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling into her bones. She was terrified, but for the first time in days, she felt a spark of something she hadn't felt since her husband's death. Hope. She was no longer alone. This fight wasn't hers to face alone. There were others, hidden in the shadows, ready to rise up against Julian and the empire of power he had built on manipulation, fear, and control. As the days passed, Maya worked with Eli and the others in secret. It wasn't easy. The plan was risky, and the stakes were higher than she could have ever imagined. But they were prepared to risk everything for the truth to come out, for Julian's empire to crumble. Every small piece of evidence they gathered brought them one step closer to taking him down. It was slow, painstaking work, but each document, each hidden conversation, added fuel to the fire. They were no longer just victims, they were fighters. The more she learned, the more Maya understood the depth of Julian's cruelty, and the more determined she became. This was bigger than her. It was bigger than Julian. It was a system of power, a structure built on exploitation and fear. And it was about time that it came down. Maya's heart raced as she sat in front of the laptop, her fingers hovering over the keys, ready to make the most important decision of her life. The weight of the information in front of her felt suffocating. Each document, every piece of evidence, was a key that could open the door to Julian's world of manipulation and lies. But with one wrong move, it could all come crashing down. She couldn't afford a single mistake. Her mind kept flashing back to the day her husband died, the quiet, cold way it had all been orchestrated. How had she missed it? How had she not seen that her husband had been a part of something so dark? But now, as she sat in front of this glowing screen, she knew that the only way to honor his memory was to expose the truth. It wasn't just about taking down Julian. It wasn't just about avenging her husband's death. It was about standing up to a system that had abused its power for far too long. The stakes were higher than ever. If the information she was about to send went public, there would be no going back. Julian would know. He would retaliate. Maya's fingers trembled as she typed in the final lines of code. The evidence they had gathered, the documents, the audio files, the hidden accounts, would all be sent to every major news outlet, every investigative journalist. The entire world would know the truth. Her mind raced through the possibilities. What would Julian do? Would he retaliate immediately? Would he try to bury everything once again? Or would this be the final straw? Maya pressed her lips together, her eyes focused on the screen. The moment had come. She was about to expose him, and there was no turning back. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, a flicker of fear crossing her face. This was it. The culmination of everything they had worked for, the hours of planning, the hours of silence, the moments of doubt. She could feel the weight of it pressing down on her chest. But then she remembered her husband's words. Trust no one except for the one who will come for you when the time is right. She wasn't alone. She wasn't fighting this battle alone. With a deep breath, she pressed send. The news spread like wildfire. In a matter of hours, the evidence Maya had uncovered was all over the airwaves, on every news channel, on every social media platform. The headlines were damning. Billionaire Julian Vane exposed for years of corruption and exploitation. The accusations of bribery, abuse of power, illegal financial dealings, they were all there, laid out for the world to see. The empire Julian had spent years building, the facade of wealth and power, came crumbling down in a single, explosive moment. Maya sat in her small apartment, the television on, her eyes glued to the screen. She could hardly believe it. The name Julian Vane was no longer associated with luxury and success. It was now synonymous with corruption, deceit, and manipulation. His carefully crafted image had been shattered. The world was watching, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Maya's heart pounded in her chest. She hadn't expected it to be like this. She hadn't expected the speed with which the information had spread. The world was finally seeing what she had seen for so long, the rot beneath the surface. The greed, the cruelty, the way Julian had used people for his own gain. And the most powerful part, he couldn't control the narrative anymore. His wealth, his influence, his connections, they couldn't protect him from the truth. The police had already begun their investigation, and Julian's empire was beginning to fall apart. His closest associates were being arrested, one by one, as the investigation expanded. Maya watched as his mansion, once a symbol of his untouchable power, became the focal point of the media frenzy. She knew that the fight wasn't over yet. This was only the beginning. But in that moment, as she watched Julian's carefully built world begin to unravel, she allowed herself to feel something she hadn't in a long time: relief. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt as though she had regained control over her life. And she wasn't going to let go. Julian's downfall wasn't just about taking him down. It was about exposing the systems of power that allowed him to thrive in the first place. And Maya was just getting started. Within hours of the information breaking, the authorities arrived at Julian's mansion. Maya watched from a distance as the flashing lights of the police cars illuminated the night. Julian's face appeared on the news once again, but this time, it was different. His eyes were filled with rage, disbelief, and fear as he was escorted out of the mansion by armed officers. Handcuffed, his once pristine suit now rumpled, his once proud stance now slumped in defeat, Julian was led to a police car that would take him away from everything he had built. The image of him, so powerful just days ago, now brought nothing but a cold sense of justice. Maya couldn't help but feel a strange mix of satisfaction and unease. She had done it. She had brought him down. But at what cost? Julian had used his power to control and manipulate. And in the end, he was a man brought low by the very system he had spent his life trying to control. As the camera zoomed in on him being placed in the back of the police car, the weight of his fall seemed to settle in the air, heavy and final. The empire he had built with his wealth and influence had crumbled, and the world was watching. For Maya, this was the moment of reckoning. She had fought back against a system that had tried to break her. She had fought for justice, for the truth to come to light. And in that moment, as Julian's car drove away, she realized that her fight was far from over. The wheels of justice had begun to turn, but the battle for true change was just beginning. It was a victory, but one that came with the knowledge that this was only the first step in a much bigger fight. And Maya would be ready for it. She would never stop fighting. Maya stood by the window, watching as the scene unfolded outside. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cars reflected off the windows of Julian's once imposing mansion, now a symbol of his fall from power. She could hear the distant sound of sirens, the crackle of police radios, the murmurs of the gathered crowd, all blending into a backdrop to the chaos that had become her life. Her eyes were locked on Julian as he was escorted to the waiting police car, handcuffed, his face twisted in a mix of rage and disbelief. He looked like a man who couldn't comprehend how everything he had worked for could be taken away in an instant. He had never imagined this day would come. Maya watched as Julian was pushed into the car, the door slamming shut behind him. For a moment, she felt a wave of satisfaction. This was the man who had tried to control her, manipulate her, and use her as nothing more than a pawn in his game of power. Now, he was the one being controlled. But as the car drove away, a strange emptiness filled her chest. It wasn't just about taking him down. It was about something far deeper, a system of power that had allowed men like Julian to thrive for so long. The arrest was a victory, yes, but Maya knew that this was just the beginning. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for the countless others who had been silenced, exploited, and oppressed. The truth had come to light, but the real fight was yet to come. Maya stood there for a long time, her eyes still fixed on the spot where Julian had been. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing: she wasn't going to stop. Not now, not ever. The world had seen what happened when one person stood up. And now, it was time for more to rise. The silence in her heart was replaced by something stronger, a fire that had been lit deep within her soul. The days following Julian's arrest were a whirlwind. The media coverage was relentless. News outlets from around the world picked up the story, broadcasting every detail of his downfall. His empire was being dismantled piece by piece, and the world was watching as his reign of power collapsed. But despite the media frenzy, Maya remained in the shadows. She didn't want the attention. She didn't need the spotlight. Her fight wasn't about fame. It was about justice. It was about standing up for what was right. Maya found herself walking to the graveyard once again, the cold wind biting at her skin as she approached her husband's resting place. She stood there in silence, the weight of everything that had happened settling over her like a heavy blanket. The world around her seemed still, as if time had paused just for this moment. She looked down at the gravestone, the name of the man she had loved so deeply etched into the stone. And in that moment, she felt his presence beside her. It wasn't a physical sensation, but something more profound. Her husband had fought for something greater than himself. He had fought to change the world. And now Maya realized it was her turn to carry that fight forward. She had done it. She had exposed the truth. She had taken down a man who thought he could control her. But the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. Julian's arrest was just the beginning. There was so much more work to be done. The systems that had allowed him to thrive were still in place. And Maya knew she had to keep pushing forward, keep speaking out, keep fighting. But for the first time since everything had started, Maya felt a sense of peace. She wasn't alone anymore. She had found her strength. She had found her voice, and she would never allow the world to forget the truth. She took a deep breath and made a promise to herself. The fight for justice was far from over, but she would never back down. She would keep moving forward, one step at a time, until the world was finally made right. The weeks that followed Julian's arrest were filled with new challenges, but also a sense of accomplishment. Maya watched as the investigation into Julian's empire continued, his allies being exposed, his money trails uncovered, and his influence slowly unraveling. But as the investigation moved forward, Maya began to feel a new weight, one that had nothing to do with Julian himself, but with the system that had allowed him to operate unchecked for so long. The truth was coming out, but there was still so much work to be done. Maya continued her advocacy, speaking out about the corruption, the power structures, and the exploitation that had been so deeply ingrained in society. She worked tirelessly with others who had been wronged, organizing rallies, speaking at events, and using every platform available to amplify her voice. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every person who had ever been silenced, ignored, or cast aside by the systems of power. But even as she fought, Maya knew the battle was far from over. The truth was powerful, but it was only one part of the equation. Change required action. It required persistence. Maya stood before a mirror one evening, looking at her reflection. The woman staring back at her wasn't the same one who had walked into Julian's mansion so many weeks ago. She was stronger, more confident, more determined. She had found a part of herself she didn't know existed, a part of her that would never back down, no matter what the future held. She smiled, a quiet, proud smile. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. And as Maya turned away from the mirror and looked out the window, she knew this was just the beginning. There was still so much more to be done, so many more battles to fight. But she was ready. She was ready to stand up for what was right. She was ready to keep moving forward. And she was ready to lead others to do the same. The fight for justice was far from over, but with each passing day, Maya knew that she was one step closer to changing the world. Maya walked down the city street, her face determined as the morning sun bathed the world in a soft, golden glow. She hadn't been outside in days, hadn't felt the warmth of the sun on her skin, or the steady rhythm of her own footsteps on the pavement. The hustle and bustle of the city felt different now, alive, almost vibrant. But the vibrancy wasn't just coming from the busy street, the honking cars, or the people rushing by. It was coming from within her. For the first time in a long while, Maya felt in control. She was no longer trapped inside the walls of that mansion, no longer held captive by the invisible chains that Julian had placed around her life. Her heart pounded with a quiet sense of empowerment as she walked through the crowd, her steps sure and steady. The world was different now. The landscape of her life had changed, and she wasn't the same woman who had walked into Julian's mansion weeks ago. She was stronger, braver, more resolute than ever before. The fight she had waged wasn't just a personal battle, it was part of something much larger. She wasn't just standing up for herself anymore. She was standing up for everyone who had ever been silenced, for those whose voices had been crushed under the weight of a corrupt system. The people around her, strangers, acquaintances, even friends, had no idea what had happened to her, no idea about the war she had fought and won. But that was okay. The world didn't need to know all the details. What mattered was that she had made a difference. What mattered was that she had stood up, had raised her voice, and had been heard. As Maya turned a corner and glanced at the skyline, she felt a surge of gratitude. For the first time since her husband's death, she could finally breathe. But she knew she couldn't stop here. There was more work to do. There were still people out there who needed her voice, her strength. She couldn't rest yet. She couldn't turn away from the truth. But for today, just for today, Maya allowed herself to feel something she hadn't in so long, peace. It wasn't a permanent peace, but it was enough. Enough to fuel her for the next battle, the next fight for justice, the next step toward real change. The journey ahead was uncertain, but it was a journey she would take with her head held high and her heart full of purpose. As the city bustled around her, Maya knew she was ready for whatever came next. She was no longer defined by the pain and fear that had once held her captive. She was defined by her resilience, her courage, and her commitment to seeing the fight through until the end. Maya stood before a crowd of people, her heart pounding in her chest, the weight of her journey pressing down on her shoulders. She had never imagined herself here, standing in front of so many people, speaking her truth. But here she was, ready to share her story with the world. The energy in the air was electric. The crowd before her was diverse, different ages, backgrounds, experiences, but they all shared one thing in common. They had come here to listen, to learn, and most importantly, to take action. Maya had never been one for public speaking. She had always preferred the quiet, the background, the spaces where she could observe from afar. But after everything she had been through, after everything she had learned, she knew it was time to step forward. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about everyone who had been oppressed, silenced, and left behind. She cleared her throat, her voice steady but full of emotion. "This isn't just my story," she began, her eyes scanning the crowd. "This is the story of every person who has ever been silenced, every person who has been exploited, manipulated, and cast aside. This is the story of the countless people who have been victims of a system that was never designed for them to win. Her words were met with silence, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was a silence of anticipation, of understanding. Maya continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. We've all heard the stories of those who have fought back, of those who have risen up against injustice. But it's not enough to just hear those stories. We need to become those stories. We need to be the change that we want to see in the world. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the faces in front of her. This is only the beginning. There are more battles to fight, more walls to tear down, more people to reach. But we have to do it together. We have to support each other, lift each other up, and make sure that no one is ever left behind again. Maya's words were no longer just a call to action. They were a rallying cry. The crowd was beginning to stir, their faces lit with determination, with a shared sense of purpose. She knew that this was the moment when everything would change. The fight for justice wasn't over. It would never truly be over. But in this moment, Maya felt something she hadn't in so long: hope. True, unwavering hope. And it wasn't just her hope, it was everyone's hope. She had started a movement, and now it was time to watch it grow. As the crowd erupted into applause, Maya knew that her journey was far from finished. But for the first time in her life, she felt ready for whatever came next. The fight would continue, but she wasn't alone anymore. And that made all the difference.
If you found this story powerful and important, please share it to spread the message of justice. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment below with your thoughts. Your engagement helps us continue to bring these vital stories to light.